I will just do one quick little icebreaker lightning round, just off the top of your head. What is the book that had the greatest impact on you as a teen?
As a teen? Oh, I'm too ashamed to admit what it was. It's out of print. This 15-year-old girl fell off a horse and was picked up by this guy who was 29 years old, but he fell in love with her just like right there when she fell off the horse. And then he waited for her for like 10 years. It was all so beautiful. I'm not saying what it was, though.
It's I would say, and all right, it's Ulysses by James Joyce, but I didn't read it. I would hold it open on the bus. I just kind of like not parse it. And this, I think, signaled to everyone in the city of Pittsburgh who I was personally, and is why I have no friends, and is why I became a writer, and hugely terrified of social interaction and all faces in general. Okay. Thank you, though. Thanks for this.
I actually really started to love literature when I was 16. I had a really good English teacher, and I feel very cliche saying this, but it was The Great Gatsby. It was the first time I actually fell in love with words, and I saw someone wearing an amazing t-shirt last night at the cocktail party that said, I want to F. Scott Fitzgerald. And I was like, I need this shirt. So yeah, I mean, that book really made an impact on me as a reader, and I became like a lifelong reader of books, and now I want that t-shirt too.
Well, if we're going highbrow, I would have to say The Picture of Dorian Gray, because it was the first book I read that was a classic that we had to read for English class that I could not put down. I just needed to know what happened. But in the rest of my life, I loved Cynthia Voigt. She wrote Homecoming, and any one of her books, all of her books spoke to me as a teenager. They were the first ones I'd read that really, I felt like I could so relate to the characters. And they were written also for sort of intelligent, I felt like she was writing assuming that I was smart, and I really liked that.
All right. Okay, question number 2. There's just 3 of these. Question number 2 is what, and you may not be allowed to answer this one, best YA movie adaptation you've seen? Yes, go on.
Totally me, Earl and the Dying Girl.
You know, I have 2 answers. No, I can't answer this question.
Yeah, come on. You haven't watched it.
Prisoner of Azkaban.
Oh. I love the first Hunger Games movie a lot. Yeah. That was like one of the movies that felt like the book to me.
I would have to say, yeah, I hadn't even thought of the Hunger Games, but definitely that was great. And I also love The Fault in Our Stars. I thought they did a nice job with that adaptation. And it hit me in a different way than the book did, which I always think is something special.
Okay, and my last one is there an actor you fantasized playing one of your characters? Now, Annie...
I can't go there,
well,
can I? I just had a book that I was the co-author of just got turned into a movie, so yeah, I can't be talking about that. That would be bad, no.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a really ticklish question if you work in movies at all, because you never, so every single one of them would be a delight.
Yes.
Oh my God, what a blessing. Oh, how glorious to envision that specific everyone in the role.
Yes.
Okay, I have no qualms about this. Come on. Actually, my newest book, The Way You Make Me Feel, everybody has a crush on the dad because he's young and hot. And so I did have in mind the whole time John Cho. So I'm putting that out there so it happens.
I've thought about that before. I've actually thought about it a lot, and I don't know who I'd want to play my main character. I think in part because she's anorexic, so I don't really want to wish that on any actress anywhere. But I do know there's a supporting character named Margot in my book, and the whole time I pictured her as Mae Whitman. That's who I'd like to play. Mae Whitman. Mae Whitman.
Okay, now the real questions. Well, basic one, why realistic fiction? Why were you drawn to that as opposed to all the other kind of types of books that teens gobble up?
Start counting that.
Okay. Alexandra?
Well, for me, it's just what comes out. I thought for about 5 seconds about trying to write a fantasy book, and I just I didn't even know where to start. I love true stories. I get a lot of inspiration from news stories and magazines and things I hear about. And that's just what fascinates me. I love seeing what people do and how they react in situations. And I love their stories. So for me, contemporary fiction is just what I'm naturally drawn to. So I don't know if I can say there's really a reason I do it. It's just what comes out.
I have a lot of reasons for it. One, I think my writing voice kind of just naturally lends itself to contemporary fiction, which means I kind of just talk permanently like a teenager, even though I'm an older woman. And then two, those were the books I read as during my formative years as a reader, like Babysitter's Club, all these, Saddle Club. Oh my God, they're all clubs. But I just really was drawn to like friendship, rooted in real world problems for girls. And I also like world building. Like I had to make a calendar for the school year for my last book and almost destroyed me, just like a college application schedule. So I can't even imagine, like I looked at my friend, Samaya Dowd, who's coming out with this fantasy book, Mirage, this year. It's going to be amazing. She had like a legend for her world building, like the language, the cultural stuff. And I was like, oh my God, the research. I started to write fiction so I didn't have to like care about the truth and facts. And so, yeah, that's why I write realistic fiction.
I can really identify with that. I remember I was like 14.
Whoops, I think you just turned off the mic.
Did I? Is it off? Good. It's more real. Realistic. I can identify with that. I remember a school project I had. I was 14. It was like, make a map and topographical clay stuff is great. I was like, oh man, I'm gonna make a map of like this beautiful, exotic, strange world. It's gonna have everything. And so I got, you start with a corner and the island thing. It looks like that. Okay, and then like mountains maybe. And then at that point, I just ran out. I was like, it's got a shore, it's got mountains, and I can only do like 5% of a map. And I don't have the imagination for the other 95%. It's just gonna be the same thing. And that would be ludicrous. So what do? Holy shit. And I just, I think dropped out of the class, which you're not allowed to do it at 14. But I was just looking my own kind of imagination inadequacy in the eye, and it won. So after that, I mean, what else can you do? I think realistic fiction has the best opportunity for comedy, and that really was kind of what interested me about it, was that, I don't know, in voice for sure, like the more observed and realistic a voice, I think the more opportunity there is to find something very, very funny in that. And then also juxtapose it against like the tragedy and the hard stuff that's in the real world, which that intersection is very interesting to me. Like the girl who has this tragic thing happening to her, but then the focus is on like the awkward kid that got shoved next to her and now just has to like deal with it. I don't know. To me, that's either funny or just very cruel, and you're just a monster. Anyway.
I had to write realistic fiction because that was part of the bet. I mean, that was what my daughter was telling me she thought I couldn't do. This is by far the most realistic book I've ever written. I mean, the stuff that I write, the Ivy and Bean stuff, I mean, I'm writing about two people I am not, 6 and 7-year-olds. And my stuff for grown-ups, again, it's always historical fiction, so I am in some way creating a world. This, however, was happening more or less in my kitchen. And because I'm an old lady, I'm invisible, which was incredibly helpful. So there I was, my kitchen was filled with teenagers, and I would just go and stand there, not making any attempt to hide what I was doing, and write down exactly what they said. And it was, they could see me, but they couldn't see me. They just looked right through me. So in many ways, this was the easiest book I've ever written because it was so realistic, because it was just sort of happening right there. I found it completely fascinating to get this close to stuff that was happening in front of me, because I'd never done it before.
One of the questions I always have is, how do you find a teen voice? You found it sort of through observation. Is how much of when you're writing teen characters is something drawing from your own experience, or listening, observing in the world, and then putting it on the page? And do you have, it's like there's always the risk of, what if you get something wrong? What if you use an expression a teenager wouldn't use? Or what if you talk about technology in your book that is gone? I mean, what if you had a whole chapter about somebody using Vine and now there's no Vine, and 2 years later, by the time the book comes out? So, how much do you have to worry about? And wondering if you have, some authors, I think, have teen readers who read the manuscript afterwards to make sure that it's, it works. Anyway. You guys don't have to answer in order, but does anybody have any answers for those things?
I think I do have Vine in one of my books, and I think you just can't worry about that stuff, honestly. I think like you make the mistakes with voice and authenticity when you're consciously trying for authenticity, and you're like, oh my God, I need to create the Rosetta Stone that's gonna, give me some access. Like, you observe, and then it's just right there, and you hear it naturally, or you just tap into the idiot kid that you kind of still are, that never left and is always embarrassing you in public and in private and with your loved ones, and then just by yourself alone. Why are you thinking that? And is someone watching? I really hope not. I hope there's no God. I hope there's no afterlife, because then I would have to be me forever. You start thinking stuff like that. Oh, man. I've been on book tour for a while. You go to a pretty dark place. You just get warehoused in like a hotel by the airport, And, all right. You're just trying to make time happen so that it's over. You're burrowing through it like a mole. What was the question? All right, I'm out.
Oh my God. Oh my God, Jesse. So I agree. Like, you can't actually worry about how is this going to get outdated? Is the language correct? Someone once said, it might have been Rainbow Rowell, that you kind of you're writing about the moment that you're writing it in, even if it's contemporary, right? And you want it to last, you want readers to relate. Okay, so I'm thinking about when I used to read Judy Blume books when I was a teenager or young in the 90s. And she used words like, oh God, it was sanitary napkin, right? And I was like, what? And there's like belts and hooks, and what is this? But readers are smart. I'm like 8 when I'm reading that, and you just figure it out, and you put it in context like, oh, this is like an old-fashioned thing. Anyways, moving on. It doesn't make you not connect to the character, these little details. Same with like at Babysitter's Club, she used to talk about like the Bobbsey twins. I was like, what is that? Parent Trap, all these movies that were way before my time, and you just kind of like, you roll with it. So I think of it that way. And as far as writing the teen voice, I do not know why it comes easily to me. It's a little frightening. Maybe some people, I've heard both, like I've seen people say, this is not a realistic voice. And then I hear people say, this voice is spot on. So it's kind of like, it's so subjective, like you can't, I think if you think too much about the purity of the teen voice, it's like pretty debilitating. You just have to trust yourself.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. It's funny. I thought of the exact same Rainbow Rowell.
Yeah, is that is that
Yeah,
you?
yeah. I think, I'm
okay.
pretty sure that she said, she decides what period her book is going to be set in, and that's just that. Like if it's 2017, she puts in what was popular in 2017. And I was a middle school teacher for 10 years, and middle schoolers definitely tell you exactly what they think all the time, and they don't mince words. And one of the things and I used to have this big classroom library in my classroom, 1,200 books, and it was awesome. And I would ask the kids, what did you think? And whenever they were talking about voice, if they didn't like it, to a kid, they would say, the author was trying way too hard. And that stuck with me when I sat down and started writing. And, and I said to myself, I'm never going to be able to be up on any slang they use. And it's just not going to sound good. My 11-year-old, even when I try it, she's like, Mom, you don't do that ever again. And I'm like, well, I just said it. I'm not writing it. It's not etched in stone. She's like, just don't do it. And so I just, and when I have conversations with teenagers, they're smart and they're intelligent and they're well-spoken. And so to me, I'm just writing a book about a 16-year-old who talks like not an adult, but just talks at my level, which I don't know what that says about me, but I'm happy. If that's my level, then I'm thrilled because I don't know, teenagers are so, they're so thoughtful. And so I think it's like you, I think that's what comes out. I think also being a middle school teacher, I had to do a lot of writing with my kids, and I had to go back. When I started teaching middle school, I really didn't remember much of my middle school and teen years. And the way I taught writing was I would write my stories when they were writing their stories. And I had to, and once those doors are open, everything comes back. And the more humiliating and horrible it is, the more your students love it. So I felt like I tapped back into that part of me, and that door never really closed. And I didn't really want it to. It was sort of interesting. So when I think about certain things, I find myself thinking about them as teenagers. And then also I shout out for critique partners as well, because as you're right, my critique partner is right there. She came to support me. We read each other everything we write. And there are times when we'll say, this doesn't sound like a teenager. This is like your voice coming in here. And so I think that's a very important part of the writing process too, because I think it's very easy as an author to insert yourself every once in a while. And all of a sudden there's this sort of grown-up character coming in. You're like, where'd that person come from? And so you need someone you can trust to be like, get that out of there.
One of the things that comes up in sometimes is like the level of swearing that's in a young adult book. And I know you got a lot of guff in your YA book for people I think they were thinking of you as the author of Ivy and Bean, and it's like, well, these girls are rather bold with their language.
I did get some guff about that, and I gave myself guff about that because I couldn't. People would say, "Oh, I hear you have a new book out for teenagers. My daughter loves Ivy and Bean," and I would say, "No, don't give it to her. Don't give it to her." And then I did also. I was invited to a book festival in Virginia, and the woman who was organizing the festival wanted me to do a panel on nothing, and I said, "There are a lot of bad words in this book," and she said, "Well, how many?" Well, that's an interesting question. So I went and I counted, and the F word, there were 69 F words in the book, and I told her that, and it's a good number. I told her that, and she said, "Okay, well maybe we can just have you talk about Ivy and Bean at our festival." So there's a lot of but that's what they're saying. I mean, as I say, I was in the kitchen copying down what they said, and that's what they said. Personally, I think listening to kids swear in conversation is really funny because of the way they flex swear words. It's just so great. It's like a patois, It's fantastic.
This is not in the interest of one-upmanship, but my second book, The Haters, has 200 F words.
Congratulations.
I know. Thank you. I think I have the title right now. And I got serious guff. Yeah, I was waiting for Guffman over here. Sorry. I'm sorry. Why did you say it? And it's for very much the same reason that there's a lack of mean-spiritedness obviously to it, and more just you're trying on this armor of coolness or adulthood or whatever sort of aspirational thing it represents to you. And especially like a book about musicians, which my second book is about. I was a musician, and it was like it was our love language. It was how we told each other we loved each other, And it's making me want to do it right now. I'm not going to do it. There are kids in the audience, but and worse stuff than that. Yeah, again, it's just that's real. That is inarguably a kid that you think is not swearing probably is at least thinking it.
They're swearing.
Yeah, and they are doing it also.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to have F words in my books. I have a potty mouth naturally, so my first drafts are just there's so many bad words, and then my editor's like, okay.
You had to take them all
And she flags every single one, but it makes me really aware, right? When they're all flagged, I'm like, oh, okay. And it makes me think a little more creatively, like, why are they saying these bad words, right? Like, that's just kind of I use a lot of bad words. But it's kind of a challenge that I appreciate as a writer, because it makes me figure out like how else they could feel this way. And then the few bad words I am allowed, I fight for them and I think are precious. So you guys, if you see the S word, it was a really hard one in my book. Yeah, and also, the tone of my books I love bad words, so if I could have them in there, I would. But I realize that the tone of my books, they don't really need them, because it's not like it loses an edge or anything that my books need. It's just the way that I talk, so I put it in my characters. So, yeah, I'm not really allowed to use bad words.
Do you have a quota? I mean, like you say.
No, there's no quota. I just I think they hope that I don't put any in, and then I fight for the few that I'm like, listen, the word darn is gonna really make this phrase boring. So, I'm like, please, can I have a damn?
You gotta fight for damn?
Yeah, I have to fight for
Come
damn.
on.
I know. Like, god
Yeah,
damn
damn is
is
butt.
really.
Damn is butt.
No,
Same level.
I'm allowed to use the word, I use butthole. I'm like, oh, butthole is okay, but not damn. Anyways, I think it's just,
Oh my god.
I think my YA skews a little younger too, so that's why. And, it's like for schools and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Nobody's ever going to adopt this book.
Yeah, I use curse words in my books, but then I often end up taking them out because I say all my dialogue aloud, and I kind of say I act it out, and I go through it, and I say, does this sound real? Like, would I actually say this? And I'm not a huge swearer, I guess you'd say, but I do curse when it's necessary, and sometimes it just is. And so that's sort of the philosophy I take with using curse words in my book too, is that, just yesterday I wrote, my character said something that was freaking awesome or something like that. And I'm like, wow, she would not say that. She would never say that. And so I did, I put the F word back in. And it's interesting, you're never gonna make everyone happy. I had a librarian email me and say, or write a review being like, too bad she uses curse words in her book, and too bad it was almost good enough for my middle school library. And then, I get this other librarian writing me saying, thank you so much for writing such a clean read. So, it's just, you kind of end up having to do it for yourself. What I do have in the back of my head is John Green, I guess, doesn't use any curse words in his books. And I never noticed that when I read them. So, kudos to him. And so for about a week, I'm like, well, I won't either. But that didn't last long. Yeah, so I just use them on an as-needed basis, but I do make a conscious decision to use them when I do. Because I also think they can be a little bit lazy. Like when I'm tired or I'm writing, I find I use more curse words when I'm sort of trying to convey something that could be conveyed by a curse word, but also can be conveyed in a much better way if I just took the time to actually think about it a little bit more.
Man, we really should have gotten John Green for this panel, huh? Man, wouldn't that be...
Oh my God.
How about sex? How do you
More comfortable topics.
how do you decide if the people in your books are gonna do everything but, or go all the way, or just be romantic and make out, or what?
I'm going to answer this first because my books so far do not have sex in them, but my next book. It's like the one that's coming out 2019 is romance, and it's like a one-day romance. And I really grappled with this. Like, I kept thinking, like, oh my God, they're gonna have to have sex, I think. And I'm like, no. Wait, no, yes. And so I've been reading a lot of these one-day romance books, and I'm like, God, they just get so sexy, and I think I have to make it sexy. I personally am so uncomfortable with it, not because I have this purity, teenagers having sex. I don't care. It's my personal thing. I know that my mother may read this book one day. My cousin is over there in the audience, and she's like, you know, and I'm just like, I can't. And, you know, it's even when I write kissing scenes, I'm like dying alone in my office. I'm like, what? My husband went the very first time I wrote a kiss scene, he walked in, like, you know, asking me a question. He's like, what is wrong with you? I'm like, I just writing two teenagers kissing is so weird. And I also, in high school, had no love life. I can't even imagine a boy, you know, like when I was 16, I was like, ugh. So I think in a way I'm really immature is what I'm saying. And even though I'm like a married lady now. So I'm grappling with that. And I think I'm not going to have them have sex because it's a one-day love story. And I'm like, it's realistic that even if they're
They've got time.
super in love, they have time. Yeah. And then it's just like, I don't have to write it, you know, like, and how do you write it? Like, how explicit can it be? And like, I read romance novels, so, you know, I'm like, that's my frame of reference, but there's no way, like, you could write, can you? I don't know. What are the rules? Where do you draw the line? Does it have to fade to black? I don't know.
I feel like, in my view, the range of what is realistic is so large. I mean, what actual human teenagers are doing certainly gives you the scope for not doing it or doing it and everything in between. So I think, you know, it doesn't mean that it's not realistic if they're not bumping. I mean, it's fine. But you could also go the other way. For me, my people, of course, are doing nothing. But that's kind of the point. But you know, it's not that I'm squeamish. I always look forward to those scenes. I like it when they kiss in my books.
I like reading them, but then me writing them, I'm
you're too embarrassed?
Just like get to a weird.
Yeah, when I'm writing an adult book, that's part of the fun.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, does John Green, does he write? I'm trying to remember.
What would John Green do?
What John Green? WJGD. I got the tattoo removed.
Yeah, right. See, it's coming out the back of his neck.
No, all right. Sex. Here's the thing. It's in. I think all three books. Definitely in the second one in a pretty explicit way. And the point of it is that it's not very good sex, and so that is like. That's the realism. That's the only kind of like teenage sex that I'm personally familiar with.
Crappy, embarrassing.
Yeah, like pretty like nothing to write home about, you know. And you know, it's not anyone's fault, but yeah, I don't know. When I started writing, like teen, like realistic, contemporary teen stuff, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go for it, but have none of the going for it again be like cool or aspirational or like this is the like totally glamorized thing that makes it great to be a teen. Because like, yeah, as far as I remembered, like nothing made it great to be a teen. It's like the worst part of your life. And so, you know, and it's definitely not like that for everyone, but I remember what that was. And I just wanted to write for the other kids who could identify with that. And so, yeah, and part of that is sex not going great, or like you don't even get there because it's clear that you don't know what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
So nothing, exactly, nothing. Usually nothing, and then something sometimes.
That's just as good.
Yeah, you should write a sequel called Something.
Day two.
Yeah, day two.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking, oh my God, what do I say about this? The amount of time that my bigger critique group spends talking about this versus the fact that I have nothing to say right now is really remarkable. We've had a lot of discussions about how much sex to include in a book and how experienced should the narrator be and how much should they enjoy it and what is realistic and not. I have a little bit of sex in my first one. And then in my second one, my critique group cut my sex scene out. I know, I'm so sad. Thanks a lot. But the one time, no, it's good that it's gone. You kill your darlings. That's what you've got to do. And I know, and in this one, she kind of enjoys it. And I'm like, darn it, someday. But I feel like the sort of the boundaries with YA are continually moving. And I think 10 years ago, what was acceptable is far less than what's acceptable now. And I think accepting, writing about teens as sexual beings, having sex, wanting sex, especially girls, I think, is something that is sort of evolving in the YA world, almost on like a book-to-book basis. And I think it's a great thing. I think that we need to show girls enjoying sex and feeling powerful and strong in these relationships and in these moments. And I think that's one of the ways that we can help teen girls as they move forward with their sexual lives to embrace them and to have more power and say in decisions in what goes on in their relationships.
I also think it's definitely like what feels right when you're writing it. Like the books I've written so far, sex scenes don't really fit in them. But and I'm joking, yeah, I can't write sex scenes, but I feel like if the right book feels like it's supposed to go there, then you would. So there's no hard and fast rule for myself. I'm just saying.
There's a call for inclusiveness in children's and young adult literature, and in all kinds of having all kinds of diversity, whether it's race or ethnicity or religion or sexual orientation or neurodiversity or whatever. How challenging is it to maintain an authentic voice and worldview of characters whose life experience you don't have, if you're writing about a character who's deaf and you're not deaf or whatever. I know there's a big push for own voices, but also, writers are writers and they're going to write all kinds of people. But especially in the era of social media where if you get something wrong, you'll get called out for it instantly online. So, it just seems like there's so much pressure on writers to meet a certain standard of diversity and accuracy and authenticity. Oh, anybody?
Do you want me to- Okay. This is such a huge, I have many, this is a very large axe that I grind frequently. Certainly we have centuries of men writing about women behind us, and I am writing about kids. I am not a kid. We are all of us, everyone should be approaching their characters and their subjects with humility. But I also feel like publishing is, as usual, way behind the curve. Because if you actually talk to, living human kids, they're so far ahead of the diversity movement. They don't identify, they don't say, oh, I know this deaf kid. They say, oh, I know this kid. They don't say, oh, I know this, queer guy. They say, I know this guy. It's just that the idea that we have to, inclusion means identifying everybody by their, by what we perceive as a disadvantaged group is really, it's not that it's passé, it's just not the way real people talk about this. And so I think that this constant labeling of everybody in literature is deleterious to actual realism.
It's funny. I think what's happening right now is we're sort of interrogating the very project of fiction itself. That unless you write a book with only one character in it, or it's set in a world of clones, you're going to be writing about people who aren't you. And, there's been a kind of lack of accountability for a really long time. And now that finally there's this long overdue, project of, hey, what if you were, held to account if your character was just a really lazy assembly of stereotypes, or if it was just the thing that everyone I don't know, there was nothing unexpected about someone who didn't look like you or didn't, have desires that weren't like your own. That's all really good. I think, it has to be calibrated, basically, because I do think there's a danger in saying, like, there are only, like, right ways and wrong ways to present a certain kind of character. I mean, ideally, like, at the same time, it's tricky to talk about, like, if you're writing a character of color, then that affects their experience, and you have to be honest about the ways in which it could and probably does, but at the same time, does it become this numbers game of like, well, 35% of the time this experience is known to happen, and so are we required to write about this? Are we required to address it? I don't know. This is the dumbest answer I've ever given to anything. I think, as like the straight, white, cis, hetero guy on this panel, I think it's kind of my job to sort of blather meaninglessly about it and then give up. So now I'm going to give up.
Actually, I think your answer is reflective of how complicated this topic is, and how it's still a learning process, and we're kind of still in the Wild West of getting better at this, right? It's only, okay, so I was just talking to Nina Lacour, who's in the audience, about this. My book came out in 2013, my debut novel, and it's 2018 now. It's only been 5 years, but within those 5 years, so much has changed in the conversation and in the landscape. Like, I barely sold my first novel, and it was kind of like, I was so worried that no one would want to buy it, like as in not readers, but publishers would not want to buy it because I have a Korean American main character. Honestly, when I sold that book, I was like, I didn't really see like any Korean American main characters in YA. And then fast forward to now, and it's like a big selling point for my next book, right? It's like on all these lists, like covers with POC on them, the best books, Asian American books, and it's like so amazing to me to see that transformation. So yeah, obviously I welcome that change and the inclusion, the effort for inclusion. Who doesn't, right? But it is a very complicated thing because then there's like purity tests that are happening. Even within the Asian American community, there's like all this critical, can you write about China if you are Chinese American, right? There's like that, like you're part of the diaspora, you're not like actually from China. So there's all these discussions happening, which I do realize can be kind of stifling and oppressive to people, but at the same time, I think it's always good to have conversations happening, and it's forcing really difficult discussions that weren't happening at all when I first came out with my first book. So I don't know, I feel like it's all about empathy, and I also do think if you're a writer and you have empathy, and you can write any experience really well. I don't believe in being very black and white about that, saying you can't write this. By the way, when you tell writers you can't, blank, it's like a challenge. You're like challenging them. So anyways, again, my answer is also rambling and complicated. And I'm not actually saying anything. But I just think that it's great that the conversations are happening. Hopefully more thoughtfully, and I like the idea of erring on the side of being not assuming the worst about people and like actually having nuance in these conversations.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think that as in the past year especially, the conversations have become much more nuanced. About a year ago on Twitter, that's sort of when everything seemed to sort of blow up, and there was a lot of anger, justified anger, and it was sort of a scary time to be a writer because you were so worried about getting it wrong, and for so many reasons, you don't ever, as a writer, want to portray someone in the wrong way. You also don't want to make a mistake and have it follow you for the rest of your life on Twitter whenever anyone Googles your name, and there it is like, oh, this person is a racist, they did this, or they're not this or that. So it was a really tricky time, and I feel like we've already come pretty far over the past year where I think these conversations are starting to become a little bit more back towards the center. I think with any movement, sometimes things start and they go way, way, way over onto one side, and they kind of have to, I think, to get attention. And then as it brings back to the middle, people can start to kind of talk about it in a less emotional and more thoughtful way. And I think that's happening. I think it's really exciting. Was it on this week on the New York Times bestseller list? There's either like 3 or 5 authors of color in the young adult section with best-selling books. And that's something that probably wouldn't have happened even a few years ago. And they're amazing books. You know, they're not there because someone is brown or black or whatever. They're there because they're awesome. And they're fine. And these writers that maybe have not been having these opportunities are getting seen and published more, which I think is really at the root of what has to happen. I could write a book about a person of color because I feel like there should be more books about people of color, but that's not helping anybody. That's not what should be happening. You know, I think we need a much wider, publishing is still very white. And so we need to work to get, you know, people of all backgrounds sort of acknowledged. There's so many good writers out there. And so it's really an exciting time to see sort of what's happening. And as a writer, it's a challenging time too, because my books so far have been set in Massachusetts, and there are the sections of Massachusetts that I grew up in and where my books have sort of naturally fallen. They're very white. There really aren't people of color there. And so it's been challenging because I think, well, should I try to add some more diversity, because I really want to, like, I want my books to be, but it's not anyone living in the areas where they would read my book. They're like, this is not this place. So I'm very excited because my next book is actually taking place in Berkeley. So that is I think my next book. We'll see. But that's really exciting to me. But there's also that sense of, do I do something because I feel like I should be doing it, or should I do something because that's the authentic thing that should be happening in this book? And I think that's a challenge also that writers are facing, because nobody really wants an all-white book these days. I don't want my books to be all white. But at the same time, I have to be true to the setting that I've chosen, which up till now has been the one that, you know, is sort of where I'm from, my roots. So I think it's a really challenging but also exciting time full of possibilities.
Okay, well, I just wanted to ask one question, and then maybe another lightning round, and then we'll get to your questions out there. Everyone on this panel lives in Berkeley except for Maurene, who lives in LA, right?
You're all from Berkeley.
Well, you're not from Berkeley, but you lived here, yeah. So do you feel like Berkeley, I mean, California or Berkeley has that affected your writing? Or do you feel like you're a regional writer or anything?
I never thought about that.
I actually do. I specifically write about Southern California. I'm from there. When I was reading all these books growing up, it was like all East Coast, you know, like Connecticut suburbs or New York City. I'm like, dude, I went to New York when I was 22 and I felt like I've been there a million times, you know? I'm like, where are all the sad white men in New York? I know all their stories. And they all want to be writers. So I made a conscious decision, like, yeah, I'm going to write Southern California Asian American teen stories. Where are they? I'm writing them. And then LA specifically, my next book takes place in LA, like I said, and I had it take place or have a food truck element to it because I wanted them to traverse the city. And it was like my true love letter to the city. I waited till my third book because I wasn't sure. I know if a book took place in the city that I love so much, it had to be special and had to showcase the city. So it's about the food and the immigrants and just the East Side, which is the best side. You guys, if you go to LA and you hate it, because I know a lot of NorCal people hate LA, it's because you're going on the West Side. Just go eat tacos on the East Side.
I just got here. I don't know. I did live in LA for 2 years. My first 2 books are about kids from, and to some extent in Pittsburgh, which is where I grew up. But actually, I did want to talk about California a little bit, because it is set there, and it's set in this kind of like sort of mostly Los Angeles, maybe a little bit Bay Area, California, and I was just drawn to writing about it, and I didn't know why until, and you know, it's sort of even after the fact, it's so much about my book, the new book, you know, inequality and specifically homelessness. You know, I moved out here for a job writing at a studio in Emeryville that must go unnamed.
What?
But it's pretty cool. However, yeah, I got here in January. I live near Berkeley Bowl, and I bike about 12 minutes to work every day and pass a big tent city on my way there. Some of whom are people with jobs, and they still can't afford houses. And then, you know, roll up to the gates and boop, get in, and you know, this just lavish campus. It's unbelievable, you guys. You should really see it. No, I mean, and this is after writing the book, so maybe I'm trying to like retrofit my experience to the book. But you know, even living in Los Angeles, the homeless population is so, you know, just at present and enormous and mind-boggling, and then so reflective of our kind of structural cruelty that our society is built around and gets worse every day. You know, I think might be easy to forget with our current president that inequality got a lot worse under Obama too, as wonderful as he was, and I think he was a fantastic president. Nonetheless, the limits of his power are reflected in nothing as well as that, I think, that it got worse. It gets worse every year, and unless we do something pretty major about it, it's gonna keep getting worse and crazier, and that's I guess a pitch for a book that it doesn't sound like it'd be that much fun to read, but I don't know, read it. Yeah, that's why, and this is not to say that homelessness isn't a problem everywhere in America, but there's something about these Californian cities where it's just more, you know, in the public spaces of the cities, and you see it. It's harder to, you know, there are 40,000 unrented units in San Francisco. It's not like there's some housing missing in this area, but you know, there's also just the problem is that housing is thought of as an investment before it's thought of as a human right. And that's kind of wild when you think about it, that a roof over the head isn't like guaranteed, you know, in the richest country in the world. I'm starting to sound like Bernie Sanders, so shut up. La, 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 la.
I never thought of myself as a regional writer. I think this is I'm trying to really think back. This is the only book that's ever been set in California. So no, I keep setting books in Virginia for some reason, a place I've never lived and hardly ever been to. So this is I don't think I'm a regional writer.
I've always gravitated towards my childhood roots. I actually, I have a book out to beta readers right now, and I tried to set it in California. And everyone who read it's like, this totally just sounds like a New England town, Alexandra. I was just like, give it up. Just set it somewhere in Massachusetts. I'm like, but no, it's California. Can't you tell? They look out their windows and they see San Francisco. And they're like, yeah, that does not make it a California book though, sorry. But I'm definitely not a California regional writer, but the book that I'm thinking of writing next, it actually starts from a big chunk that I took out of a book set in Massachusetts. That I'm really excited about, but still, it's a Massachusetts girl coming to Berkeley for the first time, and it's a very big cultural shock to come to Berkeley for the first time. When my family visits, my aunt looked at me once and said, "It's sort of like coming to a place in a different time period." And I look around, I'm like, you know, she's really not that wrong. But I've been here now for 14 years, and I've come to really love it. And so I'm excited to show that in my next book, but I don't think of myself as a regional writer when it comes to California. I think, for better or for worse, it's Massachusetts for me. But I am excited to write about California.
Okay, I'll ask one lightning round question, and then we'll go to questions from the audience. Who was your greatest influence as a writer? You know, a teacher, a mentor, an author, a friend?
I'll say my senior year high school English teacher, Miss Moon, she sat me down one day. She was helping my college essays, and she looked me in the eyes, and she had this really gravelly voice, and she's like, "Well, Alexandra, you certainly can write." And she kind of said it like she was mad at me, so I don't know. I mean, But I decided to remember the words, not the tone. And it was the first time that anyone had ever actually said to me, like, hey, this is something you can do. And and I hear her voice every once in a while. I think I make it a little nicer now, but yeah, and it continues to inspire. I'm like, you know what, she thought I could do it, so. And it was a college essay, and as most of you know, college essays are not things that you write. So, hey, if she thought I could write that, then maybe I have a chance.
This is kind of a whiplash answer, but my mom was unbelievably supportive. She's a librarian, and just everything I wrote, she was like, "Oh my God, you're writing!" That's not how she talks. I don't know. Oh my God, I can't believe you're writing. That's how she sounds. And yet, I do, if I'm being ruthlessly honest, I think the bigger help for me as a writer was my dad, who would read stuff that I wrote and say, like, "What's the point?" Like. Yikes. It feels like there's a point, like maybe on page 5, like you take a very long time to get there. Like, what's the point? You know, and so I went in my room and I started playing drums and I just bled all over the drums, you know, and go back. You know, it's not my tempo. And you start doing that. Now I'm just doing Whiplash. Has anyone seen Whiplash? Yeah, I've seen Whiplash. Let me get a much bigger laugh. All right, I'm done. Okay.
Okay, I think I would have to say for me the biggest influence was not as a single person, but it was an experience of reading that I had when I was 9 that I've been trying to have for the rest of my life. And if I can't, I'm trying to make this thing happen. And it was this moment when I was reading a book and I completely lost myself. And I was in the book and I looked up 3 hours later and I was coming out of another world, and to me that was this kind of transcendent moment of realizing that they actually were magic books, and this actually was this weird alchemy that could be made on Earth, and that was the moment when I thought, if I could do this, I would be the happiest person in the world, and that everything afterwards was trying to get there again one way or another. What was the book? It was a book called The Ghost of Lena by Peggy Bacon. It's out of print. You can get it for $500 on Abe Books.
Yeah, I don't think I actually, I'm thinking here and I have this like weird movie montage going through my head of all the people in my life. I think it was a lot of different people. So I think about who fostered my love of reading as a child. I was that kid who was always reading. It was my parents. Because my parents didn't know how to tell me to be a writer, right? But they knew, you like to read. Okay, we'll get you books. Whenever you want them, we can go to the library, we'll buy them for you. So that was really important. And then teachers, every teacher ever told me that I was a good writer and I should keep writing, which were basically all my English teachers growing up. And then my husband, who really pushed me to finish writing a book. So I feel like it's just a lot of things and a lot of people that kind of made it happen rather than one pivotal person.
Okay. All right. So now if you guys want to ask questions, we're asking you to line up on this side.
Do you have any advice for a young aspiring writer?
Yes, read a lot of books. That's the number one thing you can do. Read everything.
My advice is, that any one piece of advice isn't it. I got so many pieces of advice when I was a kid, and they just ended up confusing me. And now that I actually am a writer, I realize there are about as many ways to be a writer as there are writers on Earth. I don't know what you should do, but I think that there isn't one thing that's going to make or break you. That's kind of encouraging, huh?
I'm going to paraphrase Ira Glass because he looks and sounds like me. No, he said this really sharp thing once, which was that your taste when you start out making really any kind of art, not just writing, any kind of storytelling, music, whatever it is, that your taste really outstrips your ability when you're starting out. And so the things that you're making are almost definitely going to be so disappointing and so inadequate to the stuff that is out there. And that you have to remember that that is the journey for everyone, and it takes a long time to start to make stuff that is the thing that you want to be making, that you want to be putting out in the world. I think it's also worthwhile to remember that, like, up here, we also write kind of terrible first drafts. Our first drafts are like, oh God, I'm a fraud. Why am I doing this? This is terrible. And that, or maybe I'm speaking.
Yeah, don't speak for me.
No, I'm sorry.
My
Actually,
sparkling
my finished books are like that too. I open up the published finished book and I go, oh God, this is horrible. So no, you're never done with that gap between what you thought you were making and what there is. There's always that
It's a
gap.
really neurotic life.
Yeah.
It's really, think about what you're getting into, maybe. Because
In fact,
you're going to be in your head a lot. But
Yeah.
no, it's wonderful. It's great. You know, get to see the world.
Well, but if you have, after you think about what Jesse said, and you've decided that that is sort of the world for you, my advice would be to just write and not really worry so much about whether or not it's good or bad, because the more you write, the better you're gonna get regardless, and you're not gonna get any better if you don't write. And so that would be my advice to you, is to, read books, think about what you're getting into, and then just write your face off.
So this might be a little off topic, but you're all very candid, so you'll tell me if it is. You also might all be too young to relate to this at all, but yeah. So I'm working on a book that's about a 16-year-old protagonist that it's set in the 70s for reasons that are probably all too obvious. It's the era when I know what it's like to be 16. I've been told that that's historical young adult fiction, which was kind of a horrifying thing to hear, but I've dealt with that. I've also been told it would be a really tough sell, both commercially and in terms of relatability for young adult readers, and I wonder what your thoughts might be about that.
were you told that because it's set in the 70s? I mean, was that specifically
yeah,
the
exactly.
idea?
Meg Medina just published Burn Baby Burn, and that is set during the Summer of Sam, which I think is the late 70s. And that won awards and stuff. People are always going to tell you that X won't sell. So, I mean, it is something to consider for sure. I am practical in my career. I'm not just like my muse and I'm going to force everyone to read it. I actually do think about, okay, this is a good time for this story. But I think you're gonna live with your book for a long time. So if you feel strongly about it and you think this
Already
is,
have.
and if you really feel strongly about it and you think the setting is what makes it important or it's necessary, then don't listen to you don't have to listen to voices till you're published, to be honest. Because before then you get to be blissfully ignorant and living in your own, like, I'm the best writer and everyone's gonna love this book. That's kind of what keeps you going, for me anyways, the delusion.
I never get that thing that when you hear stuff like that, oh, the 70s, you can't set a book in the 70s, that won't sell. What? Why would one decade be verboten and another decade be okay? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
I think, you write the story you want to write and make it the best story you can, and then you've got just as good a chance as anybody else. I used to be an editor, and when I cringe now when I think of some of the things I said just to fill up space. I didn't know what I was talking about. Editors don't know anything.
Yeah.
Dude, the 70s are played out. You can't do the 70s. It's all about, there's this window between 1951 and 55, 54, 53. Sorry, someone just wrote a book.